Today I'd like to talk about the unknowable. Right now, sitting in sesshin, in the midst of your everyday life, it can bring a new perspective if you can stick it out for the whole sesshin. Someone said once, if you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family. Well, that's a really difficult way to test your understanding of reality. Not that they're difficult, but that our expectations in such situations are difficult. And that's what most of us will experience in this sesshin, is that we're all in our own households. Mostly, I think it'll just be like pins to our balloon egos during the duration. And when it's finished, if we can hang in there and really be present anyway, we'll have a new perspective about ourselves and our place in the world. Even if we live alone, expectations still rule our lives, and body, speech, and mind habits are so comfortable to rest on and to hide in. Putting them aside, even for 2 days, can be complicated and make us feel fairly vulnerable. Now you have a chance to put practice in the Zendo and at home together as one and see what you can do. We always talk about it. We seldom ever have a chance to do it so strictly and so directly. It may not be, however, as difficult as you think, because there's a time limit of just 2 days. In that time, whether it feels uncomfortable or not, try to look on everyone present as Buddhas. Try to look at your home as a temple. Try to see your food as nourishment of the spirit as well as the body, and the trials of the pandemic as a sesshin of your regular, ordinary life. Look on the push and pull of situations that you meet as a way to develop skillful means for your own balance, as well as for the rest of your household. Call up the precepts, the 6 perfections, the 8-fold path, and the 4 cornerstones of practice. Use this as a guide to lead you through this. Ration your speech and give your words carefully so that information and entertainment take on new perspectives. Put aside your struggle for personal control and limit interior and exterior complaining, and rely instead on big mind, not on self. Rely on big mind to drive the course for these 2 days. You might relax into the situation and you might trust the world more. And that means to trust yourselves more. But the outcome of such a plan would be to rest yourselves unreservedly upon your indescribable great nature, like resting in a strong boat moving safely in unknown waters. You may learn a new perspective of reality, and the 2 days of sesshin could become a short-term, intensive learning of entering into the unknown through the known situation. Peter quoted something from Suzuki Roshi recently that was really interesting. I asked them for permission to use this quote because it was such a good one. Suzuki Roshi said that enlightenment was not about attaining something, but forgetting everything. I think that's a very interesting thing. Not about attaining something, but forgetting everything. That might seem alarming unless we relate it to something actually familiar in our lives. If you see someone as a person you know and can predict more or less what they will say and do, that person has a comforting aspect to be around, even if you don't like them. You can try to set your own behavior in stone to compensate for it, but that just freezes everything more. It's even more difficult when love is in the picture. You really want to prevent change from disturbing your oasis. But here is where the most interesting part of practice can begin. If you take away the comforting aspect of a person or a situation and the unknowable enters the relationship, we feel the wind of eternity blowing through. We feel mortality. Our touchstone of reality disappears. But our version of reality was always, as a knowable thing, a delusion. And this is what we have to get rid of to see reality clearly. So from here on, try to live with a touch of the knowable and a touch of the unknowable. Your spouse is your spouse and not your spouse. Your child is your child and not your child. Your house and not your house. Your pet and not your pet. You and not you. When the unknowable happens, all possibilities blow through your whole being. That can't happen when all the doors to experience are closed and locked. But when they're open, you begin to experience all of yourself. You meet yourself as you don't know you, and you meet yourself as you know you. When that begins to happen, you won't need to look at an incredible movie to experience incredible, or do extraordinary things to experience extraordinary. But practice in a sesshin, in a zendo, is usually loud noise-free, talk-free, interruption-free, and the opportunity to be of benefit to everyone. Whether in bowing, chanting, sitting, helping in the kitchen, sweeping outside, or in giving general support to everyone by following the rules and encouraging silence and meditation. If someone is difficult, great effort is made by everyone to keep the balance and protect the person from all of our own demanding selves. That happens in a special situation of Zendo practice. But can you do that also in ordinary, familiar situations? Can you forget that you know that person, that place, and the usual situation, and instead meet that person in a new unknowable place and create a new response? Can you remake yourself on the spot, as it were? In times of difficulty, can you turn to the guides in this practice, the precepts, the perfections, the cornerstones, and the Eightfold Path, instead of turning to the usual brooding, questioning, and clinging to past behavior as your guides? The practice guides are there to help us to travel safely through the unknowable. You want to be happy, and I hope you find happiness in your lives. But aside from happiness in daily life, a bigger goal would be to look for what sustains us in our quest for freedom from the self, which is the sustaining power of joy. Happiness springs from our usual understanding, from our self-nature, and opens nothing new except more knowable. But joy springs from the unknowable and opens many doors to new understandings of the world and us. If you want to continue the round of birth and death, of limited expectation and activity, then happiness as a goal is for you. But if you want to know yourself as the unknowable and move in mysterious ways, free from the tyranny of self, then cultivate the unknowable. Look past the knowable that you meet anywhere and put aside comfortable for these 2 days and reach into the unknowable of the interior and the exterior of your lives. Unlock the door and let the indescribable enter into your lives. For a sustained practice of 2 days, you can do it. We all can. So sit quietly for yourself. Sit quietly for the world. Maintain balance where you are, inside and outside, for yourself and for the world. Dedicate your efforts to healing the world. The very healing energy you bring up from pure intention heals you as well. Keep in mind this sesshin, that you bow for the world, chant for the world, eat for the world, bathe for the world, and relate to everyone as you would wish to have in this world. For 2 days, we can make a peaceful world in our households that we would like to see everywhere. So let's dedicate this sesshin to everyone, everywhere, as we sit without goals. Thank you. Questions?
We're going to put you on gallery so we can hear your questions. It's called gallery, but we see you. Okay, there you go. So James is going to be small there.
Okay. Pull this over a little more. You can pull it over that way more. Who's that down there? Joanne. Okay.
Try to get small.
There you go. Okay. Any questions for anybody?
You said enlightenment is not adding something on, it's forgetting everything. Could you elaborate on that?
Suzuki Roshi, that's what the whole talk was about. It was just about that. Suzuki Roshi said that, and Peter found it in a talk recently. And when he quoted it to me, I thought, you know, that's really what I was trying to talk about, which is we live in a world where we're trying to always to get something. So when we sit, our goals are to become enlightened. And we want, for us, enlightenment means to expand more than we are already, to be better than we are, to be greater than we are, or somehow to fulfill what we are not at present. And Suzuki Roshi said, no, it's the opposite. It's you forget everything. And now when you meet people, you think you know them totally. And so you can never forget that this might be somebody that you really don't know. For example, your spouse can be someone you really know. It can also be flashes of people you have no idea who is present. A Buddha is present. And because we forget that within our being, a Buddha is existing, or in fact, guiding everything, then we forget that fact and we only live on the surface with that person. And we do not look underneath at the flow of life that's taking place all the time. Like a stream, you sit there and you know the stream is a stream and it looks like a solid thing, but if you look at it, the water in it is always changing. And that's what we're like. And so we have to forget our labels. We have to forget our comfortable assumptions about people. We have to forget all the things that make our life with other people easy and relaxing, and learn to see the extraordinary in every person that we meet. Those that we like, those that we don't like, those we hate, and those we think we can't live without. We have to forget all of that and see the flow of reality that takes place every moment in everyone and everything. That's what I think he means by forget everything. We have to forget the surface, rigid form and framework that we've invented and look and see what's actually moving around in our lives.
So there.
I didn't realize it, but a friend passed away in like in December, but I didn't find out till last weekend because I never go on Facebook. And it was quite a shock to discover that. And then my friend, another friend, sent me a remembrance meeting, kind of a wake that everybody had for him back then. And I was astonished to learn that I really didn't know him. And he was always very private about his life, but he was a bit of a bodhisattva. where he just seemed to show up and help people out without any ego. And at the time, as I knew him and reflected on that, I never realized that. I thought, he seems a little inept to me. He doesn't seem to have that personal drive. And now I look back on that and I see that was all me. I saw all the things that in me and him, and I never realized it till just recently. So yes, I feel a little inept, and I feel like maybe I don't have enough personal drive. But it was very, very interesting to hear this remembrance of so many different people I never knew he knew, and just really beaming with love and concern. And they were all surprised that they didn't know about each other either. So it was a very interesting thing on my behalf to learn that when I look out into the world and look at people, I'm looking through that framework. I'm seeing people in kind of a mirror of things I don't want to see sometimes about myself.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. The mirror is a very hard practice, because if you stop trying to see, the labels, then you start to see the changes, and the changes are very often reflections of us. And at some point, I think we also have to break the mirror and start to see just the direct flowing action of life taking place in everyone, in everything, even your pets, everything. So feeling vulnerable is a really good state to be in, because you can't really learn anything if you don't have that state. The minute you feel you are together, you really leave no space open for anything to come through. And so you can't really prevent anything from coming through, but you can appreciate it and understand it and learn from it every chance you have. So I think that's a really interesting experience that you have. A really good one.
It comes back to what you're saying about what Suzuki Roshi said. It's about forgetting. You're forgetting the self. And when you forget the self, and doesn't Dogen say something about that? The study of the self is to forget the self.
The self, yeah. To forget the self is to be enlightened by all things.
That's true, because if you forget yourself, if you can find yourself as you are looking into the world and forget, then you're going to see everything as it is.
Yeah, that's
and
exactly what I think.
It's a little hard.
It's a lot hard, because you can't relax into your old habits, and the old habits sustained us a lot, because if you didn't understand something, you could just start talking about something else, or you could rely on your words or entertainment or something to protect you from it. And when you decide to really look at it, then you can't rely on those comfortable habits anymore. And your habits, everything have to change. All of it has to wake up. Your habits, your body, your speech, your mind, everything has to wake up to what's going on. But I mean, there's no other way, I think. Unless we want to live this life, die, and live it again. I don't know about you, but I've had about enough of all of this.
Well, I had thought I had gotten over all that stuff, and then I found myself looking at it again. So it's funny how you think, you feel, and you relax, and you feel like, now I can really enjoy myself because I've become so enlightened. And then,
wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice? But I'm afraid that really is not it's like when I was learning piano in Japan, I was learning from a woman who was used to teaching 5- and 6-year-olds. And so I learned really fast to go through the things that a 5-year-old would learn, just because I was an adult and I could figure it out faster. But I'd show up to the class and I'd be ready to show her how good I could play it. she listened to me about a half a minute, and then she stopped and throw something much harder at me, you know, so I blunder through the next thing. And I think that's the way everything is. No matter how good you get at anything, the next step shows up, and it's always harder, and it's more difficult, and it leaves you feeling vulnerable most of the time, but that's the only way we can really learn, I think. We're lucky, actually. Yeah, Joanne.
Hi there. I would like to get a copy of your Dharma talk. It happens to really parallel what I was just talking to Peter about in Dokusan, is, you know, the knowing that you are more than your physical identity and whatever is associated with that.
Mm-hmm.
And bringing and existing in the physical world as much as possible as like whatever it is that's more. I'm not sure how to say it, but and so you mentioned something of like a boat.
Yeah, that's, you know, the resting the self on the self that Peter has mentioned and our teachers talked about when we were sitting in Tassajara, you know, is like they were always telling us when we sat in meditation to rest ourself upon the self. And I think that he was referring to resting our small self, the one that wants to control everything, instead putting away that control and resting on the flow of our bigger, greater self.
Mm-hmm.
Letting that be the driver for a change.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned a boat today because last night I did an art workshop with a friend of mine on Zoom, and the theme last night was the ocean. And so she said, well, what occurs to you, all the participants, when you think of the ocean? And a lot of people were like, oh, I'm in the waves and I hear the waves crashing and I feel relaxed. And I said, well, I think about Jaws, the movie. You know? And like, to me, the vastness of the ocean and not knowing what's underneath is frightening. And then the other practice that she did is she had a bunch of quotes and everybody picked a number to get a quote. So this is my quote, and I think it's very interesting and relevant to the talk. It says, out of sight of land, the sailor feels safe. It is the beach that worries him. And it's by Charles Davis. So when I started thinking about this, because like when I heard out of sight of land, the sailor feels safe, I was thinking about Jaws, and I'm like, what? How could that be safe out there? And then I thought about how, like, as somebody who might be like in a boat in the ocean, what first came to my mind was the image of myself with a pair of binoculars looking for land, which really is like terra firma, you know, stable ground, right? And I thought, yeah, that's what I do. That's what I do all the time. I'm always looking for something that I can count on, or that has aspects that are knowable. And when I thought about this sailor, I'm like, well, how can a sailor feel safe in the ocean and be worried about like being on the beach on stable land? So to me, after hearing this Dharma talk, the sailor to me is almost like the big self, and being in the flow of life. And the idea of the beach, you know, once you're on terra firma, like in a stable, you know, what we would call a stable, comfortable situation, it seems to me like that introduces a lot of limitations. But if you're your big self and you're in that boat and you're on the ocean, you don't know what's under the water, you don't know where you're going, but you feel safe because you have trust in it. I mean, that opens up all possibilities. But it was interesting to recognize that what Joanne does is looks for the beach, the safety of the beach. Anyway, that was my observation.
Okay, thank you. That's an interesting way to look at it. I think looking for the beach is the same way as trying to avoid vulnerability.
Yes, that too. Yes, right. Because if you're in the middle of life, you have to be vulnerable. Yes.
Yeah, you have to trust yourself when you start moving in uncharted waters, as it were. But you have to trust the bigger part of yourself, and that means to trust the world also. So,
Yes. Yes. Trust what's under the water that can't be seen, and trust what you can see with your binoculars or the naked eye.
okay, thank you, Joanne. Daniel, did you have a question here? How is virtual sesshin different and the same as in personal sesshin? Well, the biggest difference would be you don't have the bodies of people around you encouraging everything. So all the encouragement for sitting a virtual sesshin has to come from you or one other person if you're with them. So there's not much you can do about it except to really trust yourself in this case. And that's what this whole thing is about, is learning how to believe in yourself enough that you can chart yourself even into unknown waters about areas that you have always relied on as being safe. And then you find out that the areas you relied on are not as safe as they seem, because maybe that's what the comment about being afraid of the beach is about, is that the person you think you know so well, actually, you're only looking at a surface part of that person. And the real person is this changeable, flowing water that is always moving, and you're always having to adapt to it. Only in the past, you either fought it or ignored it. And now, if you wake up to it, this change, then you have to begin to flow as well. You can't be rigid in anything, and you have to be able to change and be flexible in whatever happens in your life. And that's the hard part, is that you can never just sit back and relax on old habits. So you have to be ready for change in everything, not just your life, but the life around you, the life of the people you know, everything. And for me, that's the hard part, is not being able to just have a good time for a while, have a hard time for a while, and then just sit back and say, okay, now don't bother me. I don't want to be bothered for anything. I read somewhere that if you are awake to your life, even the TV becomes a method of learning, no matter what the program. So we can't block off anything in our lives, no matter what it is. And we can't immediately say, oh, the TV, that's a waste of time. You don't know, it may not be a waste of time. You listen to popular songs, you think they're a waste of time, but then you start listening and you think, well, maybe they aren't a total waste of time. So everything in your life starts to change. Once you start to see that flow, everything starts to change in your life from it. So whether you're sitting virtual or personal, the same thing happens. And I think maybe it's harder in virtual because you have families and households or aloneness to deal with in it. That's probably very hard, especially when you feel you know the people so well, and then you don't, you find out that they're flowing and you may be standing still. So Peter, why don't you say something on this? That's a good topic.
Well, of course, I teach it with Zoom and in my other schools, and so I'm kind of used to it, but I'm also used to always getting in trouble with it. And I get in more trouble with Zoom than any place in my personal life, which of course my personal life is Zoom. Not because of what's communicated on it, because that's not a problem. Right? But anyway, that doesn't answer the question at all.
So answer it.
No, sometimes when I'm on Zoom with somebody, in a way, because you know you're right with the person, even though the person's not there. There's only the person's head there, mostly head and shoulders, and so sometimes it actually feels closer. Sometimes I feel like when I'm not necessarily here, but like in my other school, when I'm teaching, and I feel people are actually maybe paying more attention on Zoom than they do when they're in the ordinary classroom, because the focus is easier to concentrate on one thing. So I don't find, and of course then I have people like Ed and Daniel and Donna and Spencer and even Mark Middlebrook. Though I see him every week, certainly, or Mike Martin, I can see now about once a month, or Stacy. No one lives near here, right? Actually, they can walk here, like in the temple. So it's really great to see her. You know, it's wonderful. And Joanne's in Pasadena, and I forgot about Joanne there, so I can't see her face right now. But she's in Pasadena, and so from that point of view, it's wonderful. You know, to be able to make relationships, to continue relationships from the past.
Yeah.
One time, Mel, I've forgotten when it said, I can't remember what it was, but the best part of having he was at Berkeley Center, and they're not huge, large, but they're a great deal larger than we are, maybe 4 times or so larger than we are. And he said the wonderful thing is to have all your old time relationships. So some of you are new time, some of you are old time, but you know, it's relationships. I don't find that they're hurt by Zoom.
No, I don't either.
So